Namaste. So what is yoga? This is such an interesting question, and it's a very broad question, and sometimes we might not realize how broad of a question that is. So I'm going to outline a little bit where yoga comes from, the definition of yoga, and the different interpretations or articulations of that over the years. So yoga is part of the Sanatana Dharma, and that means it's part of the ancient wisdom tradition that comes from India. And Sanatana Dharma means the eternal way. So this is part of a knowledge that was considered to exist within the universe. So yoga specifically, the word means yuj in Sanskrit, or to yoke, or mastery. So think about a yoke for cattle. So in older times, people used to use a yoke to keep two cattle operating together, to keep them working in harmony for a kind of an integration. So in this interpretation of yoke, yoga means to bring ourselves into a state of harmony or into a state of integration. The body, the mind, and the spirit, or the body, the breath, and the mind. Yes, so if we're not working in harmony, if the breath and the body and mind are all sort of off kilter, then we're not in a clear state, or we're not operating as would be for the highest and the best in our lives or in society. So Swami Shivananda of Rishikesh used to say yoga is the integration of head, heart, and hands. So that what we think and what we feel and say and do are all in harmony, are all the same. So if we're thinking one thing and saying a different thing, then you can see obviously that this doesn't work well, or it leads to disharmony in our lives or amongst us and other people. So peace or ease, or the state that is yoga, comes from the integration of head, heart, and hands. I just love this interpretation because it's very practical, it's very easy to understand. But in the more mystical sense, we could think of yoga as the integration of the unit soul and the supreme soul. So it's the integration of our energy system with that harmonious rhythm of nature. Often we call that Om. So that just eternal vibration of the universe. So when we come into harmony with that eternal vibration, then naturally we just drop back into a state of ease. So they say that the word yoga in terms of a path was first articulated in the Bhagavad Gita, and that was in about 1500 BC. So when Krishna, this embodiment of wisdom, this embodiment of the divine, he was talking to Arjuna, his cousin, and they were on the edge of a battlefield, and he begins to give this discourse on yoga. And he goes through it, and he says, you know, yoga is Gyan Yoga, or he entitles this Gyan Yoga. So that is the yoga of contemplation, of the mind, bringing the mind into harmony through contemplation. And then the second path is Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. And the third is Karma Yoga, this yoga of action, of harmonious action. And I'm going to talk about these three in another video, but suffice it to say that in the Bhagavad Gita, it's the first time we see the word yoga used in this way. So Krishna says this is yoga. These paths are roots to yoga. So that brings me to an interesting point, that yoga is actually a state of being. Yoga is that state, it's not a doing. And nowadays in modern times, we often call yoga, we say we're going to do yoga, we mean yoga postures. And the postures are part of a vast technology that's used to bring us into the state of yoga. So they are actually ways to come into this harmonious state, this integration. So I just think that's an interesting point, because yoga is the path, but yoga is also the state that is beyond doing, that is just a deep presence, a deep beingness. So that is really yoga, this integration. And this, I guess, brings us to Patanjali. In the 3rd century AD, we think, Patanjali articulated the Yoga Sutras, and his 2nd sutra is a definition of yoga. He says, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And that means roughly, yoga is the stilling of fluctuations in consciousness, or yoga is the stilling of the thought waves in the mind. So again, we come to this idea that yoga is a stilling or a settling or an integration. And once we come into that state, then there's a peaceful beingness, there's an expansiveness, there's an ease of anything that's going to come from that state, any action that's going to come from that state. And I would like to just say that when we think about what we know about thought waves through EEG machines and things like this, we have beta, which is the very rapid cycling of thought waves. And this is where we're actively thinking or actively sort of busy, engaged in multiple different activities. We have a very rapid cycling of thought waves. But alpha is a stiller one. When we're doing Shavasana, for example, or when we're holding a posture, taking a deep breath, and allowing the mind to drop into alpha, which is a more gently undulating thought wave pattern. Slower than that is theta. So when we go into a deep Shavasana, or we're in the state between waking and sleeping. In the yoga technology, we often talk about these states between waking and sleeping. We're in a very still state of mind that's very intuitive. Intuitions or visions. Think of when you wake up in the morning and sometimes poof, an idea or concept or something you've been working on is just right there. So the theta state is very intuitive state. Slower than that is delta. So very quiet fluctuations of mind. And this is what Patanjali is likely talking about in Sutra 2, that yoga is this settling of the thought waves in the mind. And these are natural states. We sometimes think of yoga as hard, something that's difficult to do. But yoga is actually a technology to allow us to utilize the natural capacities of body and mind for integration, for deep stillness, in which there is a clarity, a harmony, and a deep understanding or a deep wisdom. So in yoga, we call that sat, or truth. And we come to this deep understanding of the truth of the universe. So that's a little bit about yoga. Patanjali goes on then to talk about the technology from saying yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the settling. This is a definition of yoga, the stillness. And he goes on with a wealth of a repertoire of what allows us to experience that. And he's most famous for his eightfold path, Ashtanga Yoga. And I'll do another video to explain that, but suffice it to say that the Yoga Sutras is probably one of the most well-known articulations of what is yoga and how to come to this state. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an understanding of how far back we see the term of yoga in terms of a path, and also the broader wisdom tradition in which it exists, the Sanatana Dharma or the Indian wisdom traditions. Thank you very much for listening, and see you again. Hari Om.